Okay, welcome. Thank you all for being here on this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about putting a lab experience in a concrete design course, so not materials, but more the structural side of things. I'm the first person up there. I did have some colleagues at other schools when we were investigating this issue, so Matt and Chris helped quite a bit. Let's see. So again, thank you to Garrett for introducing project-based learning. I think it's probably clear to most of us that, I guess as we dove into this project to do some lit review on project-based learning, kind of the learning style of it, labs provide obviously a visual of what is designed. The process can be made very active and experiential. The students always, in my opinion at least, remember being immersed in this. You know, they're getting their hands, in my world, they're getting their hands dirty and getting some concrete all over them. For us, reinforced concrete beam construction is the experiential learning. You know, there's a lot of things that go into that, the formwork, the rebar, the fact that concrete is heavy, this is one way to really reinforce that, I guess pun intended. And also the detailing of the bars and cover requirements is something we show on paper in 2D, and it's really not that easy to understand until it's in 3 dimensions and you're trying to figure out how stuff actually fits in. And then the reason why I started doing this years ago was to let students see what happens during different failure modes. To me, it was like, I kind of know what tension controlled and compression controlled are. I know a little bit about deflection or serviceability, et cetera. But seeing it, you know, in person at the test is really impactful. But of course, there are some challenges. In particular for us, as you start building these beams, and they're really not that big, they're probably the size of me, that makes you know, a lot of things happen. One, you need a laboratory facility or some way to break it, hopefully, which requires space. And if you say that word on a college campus, usually you get in trouble asking for space. Also, we need testing equipment, which involves money. So that's another word we don't say on campus. But if you have those things or are able to acquire them, and in reality, what we'll see a little bit today, but in reality, if you can get kind of the bare minimum, it works. There are ways to create reaction frames that are kind of, you know, everything's happening internally. You don't need a strong floor. Where I work now, we don't have a strong floor, and it still can go. So, but with making concrete beams, it is labor intensive and time consuming. So there's a balance between what we let students do and what we do and how much time we dedicate to this. And the 3 of us in this study, as we get there, you'll see a variety of approaches, some of which require more time than others. But it really can't be accomplished quickly. You know, it's a multi-class thing. It's not just one day. It's not just an hour. In general, most of the time, maybe other folks in the room have other experiences, a concrete class doesn't come with a lab. And if you're one that teaches that, you're probably pretty lucky because it's pretty nice and you can really explain things. So for all the 3 of us, we weren't teaching a class that had an extra lab section. It was just a 3 credit class, 3 times a week. We implemented labs. It took additional time. There isn't room in the curriculum for us to put this in as a lab course, so it was really just, you know, substitute in for a class. It did take away from traditional class time, but I think probably what you'll hear today, the high impact of project-based learning is totally worth it. So we did do a lot of literature review of seeing what people do breaking beams in class, and you might think in your head, surely there can't be that many papers written about people breaking beams in classrooms because it's not research and it's not private sector. But there's a decent amount. It kind of goes back to West Point and things that happened through military. But there isn't a universal method. There's not a lot of guidance. Most people do what they think is most impactful. But overall, from the literature at least, the perception is that this is valuable. Every paper that we read demonstrated that. There are different ways that folks did it in the literature. First and foremost, you can demonstrate this. So you can bring in a little model, maybe it's scaled, you can break it, you can watch it. You can do that on a video, so it's pre-recorded. Or you can just take students to a lab where stuff's already, you know, revved up, ready to go. The grad student breaks it, they just watch. And so there's a wide variety of things that have happened. We don't have lab time in our course. That was true in the literature as well. One of the really wide variety things that we found is just where do you plug students in this process? Should they be designing the beam? Should they just be analyzing something that you give them, like here's a rectangle, it contains these 3 things? Or are you in somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, right? Are we starting from scratch or are we giving them everything? And then are we physically breaking these things, or is it more non-destructive and maybe even via computer? So the goals of this study for the three authors here were to somehow compare methods of administering a lab, and we generally all did maybe roughly the same, but there are some pretty important differences. We did compare resource requirements for these methods in relation to adding a lab to a course and compared it to the literature. None of us were ever able to, add an extra credit to our class and gain an extra hour. So pre and post this lab experience for this semester, we did provide some surveys to students, get their perceptions and feedback, and see where they thought, the highest impact was. And so were there any other patterns, best practices, or things that we noticed was the last goal? My talk is not as fun as that one, it sounds like. So at three different universities, we just called ourselves A, B, and C. When I did it, my name's Ben. This didn't work out that way, but I am B, so it works. There was three different ways of doing this. It was implemented maybe differently than some folks that have talked, but these are primarily undergrad classes, so we want to get students in their, concrete 101 to see and learn a bit more than just sitting in a desk. None of these, as I mentioned a couple times, had a lab section, so this was taking away from typical class periods, and every student in the class was required to participate, so it wasn't optional to go and see and view. So our class sizes ranged from 15 to 40. All three of us taught 3 times a week. These were group projects, so when we're at 30, 40 students, it's not possible to do small groups, so anywhere between 3 and 6 students. The cool part of it is that the range of testing, and I guess maybe I'm on the low end, but was actually a decent number of beams, anywhere between 4 and 8 of these, 6-foot long, relatively full-scale things. And we were specifically looking at different failure modes, mostly flexure, but also shear. The places where we varied the most, the three of us, were in how we delivered the lab and then what we asked students to do. So these range the gamut of, you need to come out of class, not during the 3 hours per week, make an appointment in the lab and show up essentially in your own time, which is a big ask of students in particular these days, with student groups and jobs and a lot of folks working. I'm in the middle, so I sacrificed or used 2 class periods, essentially roughly a month apart, and we went to the lab, did some construction, talked about topics in class, went back a month later and watched the failures. And then the last option here is out of class, you're building these things and pouring concrete, but then we're testing them in class so everybody can see everybody. Some of my colleagues made this a required up to 10% of the grade, half participation, or I guess I should say 1/3, and 2/3 of some kind of writing. For me, it was optional, so we are running the gamut with, essentially required, your grade depends on it, to more like observation, learning, but still a bit of hands-on. So for the first school, the designs of these beams, and this is done by the professor. The students built the beams, and this is one of the ones that was out of class. So you can see a couple pictures here of students. I believe in this case the formwork was also built by the students. They also tested the beams, so the picture on the right is students going through the setup. They're measuring load. There's a load cell in between the actuator there, and they're measuring displacement. It was an out-of-class thing, but they did have to do a report, so this is determining your grade, so it's a bit of an ask of students. The groups were 3 to 5. They were only responsible for 1 beam, so of all those 8, there was 8 beams. But the professor was watching. This is at more of a teaching school, so it's really, their time is more dedicated towards teaching rather than research. And so what they experienced here, and these are some of the details mainly for reference, but we're looking at various flexural failure modes, whether it's tension failure, compression failure, a shear failure, which I think all of us did. The reinforcement is relatively straightforward, number 4 or 5 bars, and then a variety of stirrup spacings to kind of push us towards shear or flexure. So students are aware of this. They need to build their beam to match these specs, which has been set up by the faculty member. In the second one, which is, this is me, we had 4 different beam types to investigate, mostly given by me to the students. I did, I guess I would say maybe at least the least amount of student engagement, meaning I didn't want to take out of class time. So students went to the lab during a 1-hour period, assisted in the building. So what I tasked the students doing specifically was tying the rebar cage, spacing stirrups and bars, putting it into formwork, which we eventually led up to owning repeatable metal formwork, so something that's super easy, not degrading over time. And then leave, and having experienced some of the hassle and come back a month later and watch them being tested. I had the real benefit of the testing portion, one being in a nice lab with all the hydraulic equipment, but two, having a TA there to help essentially forklift in and out stuff, hit go on the actuator and the hydraulics, and students watch. So taking out of the undergraduate hands, maybe kind of like Dimitri was saying, out of the undergraduate hands, some of the risk and some of the, stuff that is just beyond them. So I didn't ask students to necessarily report their findings. It was an extra credit thing. But they could analyze, for example, first cracking moments, what's the total deflection, how do I plot load versus deflection? And we sought to look at tension-controlled flexural failures and shear failures. So for example, for me at least, the extra credit was, here's a picture, well, part of it, here's a picture of the failure, there's a ruler talking about compression zone, tell me more about, for example, the flexural strength or something like that, right? And here's some load displacement data, tell me when it first cracked. And so just interpreting the data, which is provided from our lab. The last faculty member took quite a different approach, which is high impact for sure. The students were tasked in this project to do the design, so nothing was given to them, no cross-section, no reinforcing. Build their beams, test them, and then report and present on it. So by far the most work, probably the highest impact from a project-based learning, but it was mostly out of class. There were groups of 5 students selected by the professor based on GPA, gender, and time availability. So can you meet on Tuesdays or whenever. And what they were asked to do is fit a beam inside of a 10-inch square envelope, so any shape you want, and you can see the stack of shapes and sizes, and predict the accuracy of their capacity, ductility, and efficiency were part of the final grade. So what do you predict the failure being? How much did it cost? How much formwork did you use, etc. To make all of this happen in probably a timely manner, the faculty member and a grad student were participating. And it's not in my talk, but I do know that kind of the next iteration for this faculty member was, hey, we're already doing this kind of variety of shapes. Let's make it a competition, and students tend to thrive on competing and trying to win and beat each other. And so it progressed towards like, is my design efficient? Can I predict things even better? And I'm comparing my group to another group. There, I guess I highlighted what I said. Like I mentioned, we were asking students to provide their perceptions and feedback as we went, which I think is valuable. It's not just end of the semester, hey, you were terrible, it's too much work. But before and after the experience, we asked students to answer a few questions. One of them was pre and post, what's the most difficult part of constructing the beam? In the beginning, you could probably guess what students might say, they don't really know. At the end, we asked them these 3 questions. So again, what was hardest? What did you learn that you didn't understand from the lecture? So what was maybe perhaps missed or most impactful? And which part of the construction helped you understand the course material? So we had a 91% response rate, so we pretty much hit every student. And I'll go through some of the results here relatively quickly. So what is the most difficult part of constructing the beam? And I think for me at least, on the left side over there, the initial results is kind of all over the place, even though they're here in a tabular form. I would have expected that 90% say, I don't know, this is the survey, I'm done with it, great. But students were guessing, maybe it's the rebar, maybe it's the formwork, maybe it's the curing and weighting. So it was kind of all over the place. I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what to expect. After the lab experience, that number went way down, and maybe because of the hands-on, most students said, well, positioning the rebar is not something I thought was complicated. Like, in a drawing form, it's just magically there. Somehow it looks like a rectangle and they're spaced nicely. It turns out it's not that way at all. And then, as you would probably guess, the one university that did incorporate design most drastically had a high response there. This is actually fairly complicated. Turns out my predictions aren't close, right? I'm conservative, hopefully, but this is challenging. So we did see design at the other universities. Formwork and mixing were not challenging, apparently. They were relatively straightforward. I guess I should say, at least in my case, the concrete came ready mix truck and we dumped in. Some of the folks, I think, actually I think that was the case at all three. We didn't make the concrete, we bought it. So it turns out that a lot of the results were on construction, which in my personal opinion is a good thing for students to see, because if you're going into design, don't forget that this can be challenging, and you want to think about construction as well. Design was difficult for many, but a lot of them at University C here were really doing design. The actual concrete, though, after this didn't seem challenging anymore. So what did you learn in the lab that you didn't comprehend from the course or the lectures? The results were a bit all over the place, but as you might expect, construction is challenging, or something I didn't understand, because we don't really cover that in design classes. Maybe some folks do in the CM side of a concrete class or something. It really helped here zoom in on what is a failure mode. Do you see ductility before things fail? Do you not? We all tell students that shear cracks happen at an angle and it's 45 degrees, and they get lost because you're like, yeah, more circle, but actually seeing it, and they understand that makes sense. There are some time-dependent processes that we didn't do that you could show with videos, like if you wanted to see cracking over the course of the 1-hour test and you recorded it, you could slow it down and watch where they go. We weren't asking students to get in there and look and measure and trace with a permanent marker or anything. So some of those could be in the classroom. Similar with pictures, if you wanted to highlight these. We did have I don't know, this is in my opinion relatively high number, 14%, that said this wasn't really useful. It's probably because they were asked to dedicate some time out of class and got frustrated and didn't want to be spending more than 3 credit hours per week doing this project. Last but not least, question of student perceptions. What helped you best comprehend the course material? So in general, it was construction. It was thinking about how do these beams go together, connecting the dots on longitudinal reinforcement and how it's connected to vertical shear reinforcement or something like that. That was pretty ubiquitous across all the places. Again, design was important, particularly at University C, where they did a lot of design. And then here's the same, maybe 10% of the folks that just didn't really care for the lab. Maybe structures isn't their thing. At least in my university, when I taught here, this was a required class, so we are pulling in environmental students and water students and asking them to do something that they perhaps now care less about. But in all these, the 3-dimensional topics that were harder to demonstrate in the class really show through the results. So what were some of the things that we took out of this? Students seemed to enjoy the hands-on construction process. I think we would have all guessed that. They really liked seeing the failure modes and the cracking. The out-of-class work was not universally appreciated. That's probably something all of you could have told me. But the lab reports can be time-consuming. But across all three, we did learn things. Those who did an optional assignment or did an assignment gained a deeper understanding. It was a significant effort for the students, and particularly those that were out of class. For this University C, where they were doing design, the faculty made sure that there were interim kind of checkpoints, so it's not just design away for 2 months and hope you land on something that works. So there's a bit more involvement from the faculty. So in conclusion, the labs took a significant amount of material and time. This was ubiquitous in the literature, and for us, I have seen it done on a bare minimum. It's definitely possible. The out-of-class time's got to be reasonable. I think we were flirting on the edge of that, and it worked out. The in-class time, which is what I did, with only 2 hours, you really got to be efficient, because I want students to focus on, for example, the failure mode, and not the cool forklift driving around. A design component obviously pushes students to learn at a higher level. This is the dream. Everything is design, and we can iterate many times, so kudos to you, Garrett, for iterating. But the construction, the detailing, the 3-dimensional rebar cages, really were key in these experiences for our students. So with that, I'll end there. I'm happy to answer questions and chat more about it. We did publish on this work in ASEE a couple years ago, so if you're interested in more details, yeah, thanks for listening.